Hi friends, I am Dr. Aniamma Joseph. Here is an attempt to revisit the old favorite classics. Today, I am going to give a summary of Pride and Prejudice, the novel by the 18th century novelist Jane Austen. Pride and Prejudice still captures the hearts of the readers and pokes questions on the social and economic realities of women's lives in Jane Austen's time: love, marriage, class divisions, rise of inheritance, etc. In the end, we see how pride and prejudice of the hero and the heroine meet on a level. It's a sunny romance, and humor and drama adds to its charm. The novel begins with a captivating sentence. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. So, when Mr. Bingley, a rich young bachelor, rents Netherfield Park in the neighborhood, excitement stirs in the Bennet family, which includes 5 marriageable daughters. The frivolous, shallow witted Mrs. Bennet immediately begins plotting one of her daughters getting married to Mr. Bingley. Mrs. Bennet persuades her unwilling husband to pay a formal call at Netherfield Park, and he obeys his wife. Mr. and Mrs. Bennet, with their daughters Jane, Elizabeth, Mary, Kitty, and Lydia, attend a social function where Mr. Bingley and his aristocratic friend Fitzwilliam Darcy are present. Darcy feels contempt towards Mrs. Bennet's shallow nature, and Elizabeth happens to overhear his arrogant remarks on the local provincial society. He also refuses to be introduced to her. So Elizabeth instantly feels prejudiced against him, in spite of his good looks and great wealth. However, Mr. Bingley dances and strikes a friendship with Elizabeth's lovely, good natured older daughter Jane, to whom Elizabeth herself is closely attached. In the following weeks, Bingley and his sisters become friends with Jane Bennet, and romance seems to flourish between Bingley and Jane. Eventually, Darcy finds himself increasingly attracted to Elizabeth's charm and intelligence. One day, while visiting the Bingleys in the rain, Jane comes down with a bad cold and is compelled to stay at Netherfield Park. Elizabeth walks 3 miles through the mud to visit and nurse her sister. Mrs. Bennet sees this a great opportunity to foster relations between Jane and Bingley. While Elizabeth is nursing her sister, Darcy pays her more attention, and Caroline, Bingley's younger sister, who has an eye on Darcy, burns with jealousy. She never misses a chance to ridicule Elizabeth. She tries to unsuccessfully poison his mind against Elizabeth. A more serious obstacle to the romance is Darcy's distaste for Elizabeth's vulgar, scheming mother, and for the younger Bennet girls, the dull-witted Lydia, Kitty, and Mary. Meanwhile, the Reverend William Collins, a cousin of the Bennets, who is supposed to inherit Mr. Bennet's estate as he has no male children, visits them and proposes to Elizabeth twice, and she rejects him to the displeasure of her mother, but to the satisfaction of her father, who is fonder of her than of his other daughters. Mr. Collins is a foolish and a boastful person, and he always boasts of his patroness, the rich and arrogant Lady Catherine de Bourgh, an aunt of Darcy's. Mr. Collins gets engaged to a friend of Elizabeth, the quiet, unimaginative Charlotte Lucas. The Bennet girls become friendly with the military officers in a nearby town. Among them is Wickham, a handsome, dashing young soldier who is friendly toward Elizabeth and tells her how Darcy cruelly cheated him out of an inheritance. Shortly after the ball, Bingley and his sisters suddenly leave Netherfield for London. Elizabeth is quite convinced that Bingley's sisters are trying to keep him from marrying Jane, whom they consider beneath him. Jane accepts the break with apparent composure, but soon visits her aunt Mrs. Gardiner in London, hoping to see Bingley there by chance. Later, Elizabeth joins her in London. She learns that Bingley has never visited Jane. Elizabeth believes that Darcy has deliberately kept Jane's presence in the city from Bingley. Elizabeth visits her friend Charlotte Lucas, now married to Mr. Collins in Kent. She feels pity on Charlotte when she realizes that she married him out of necessity, fearing a lonely and poverty-stricken life as an old maid or a spinster. Darcy's aunt, Catherine de Bourgh, Mr. Collins's patroness, lives nearby. Darcy meets Elizabeth on his visit to his aunt. He grows attracted to her more and more. One day, quite unexpectedly, Darcy proposes to her, and Elizabeth flatly refuses to accept his proposal. She tells him that she considers him arrogant and unpleasant and shows her displeasure in steering Bingley away from Jane and also disinheriting Wickham. Darcy leaves her. Later, he sends a letter to her explaining his reasons for withdrawing Bingley. That the Bennet family was beneath his friend's attentions, but he strongly denies the charge that he had wronged Wickham. In fact, Wickham had been planning an underhand plot to elope with his younger sister, Georgiana. Elizabeth's prejudice against Darcy starts melting. Evidently, she has no illusions about her mother and younger sisters. Darcy's family retainer gave her a very good report on his master. When she happens to visit his mansion with her uncle and aunt, she is more confirmed of his innocence. Her younger sister runs off with Wickham. Elizabeth feels that Darcy, whom she has begun to love, will definitely desert her after this incident. Surprisingly, she learns later that Darcy goes secretly to London, finds Lydia and Wickham, and gives him money for marrying Lydia. When Lydia returns to her home, she informs them of Darcy's positive role in getting them married. She also gets a letter from her aunt, Mrs. Gardiner, confirming the fact, though Darcy had sworn her to secrecy. Soon Bingley gets engaged to Jane, the arrogant Lady Catherine de Bourgh, who had designed Darcy to marry her own daughter, who was a plain and unenthusiastic, unattractive girl, comes getting a rumor that Elizabeth and Darcy have become engaged. She haughtily demands that Elizabeth give up Darcy. Elizabeth coolly tells her to mind her own business. When she reports the matter to Darcy, he begins to hope that Elizabeth will return his love. Darcy again proposes to Elizabeth, this time with proper humility, and he is happily accepted. Mrs. Bennet, having married off 3 of her daughters, is filled with joy. Mr. Bennet philosophically awaits any further suitors who may come along for his younger daughters. Pride and Prejudice is a social comedy. Jane Austen herself has commented on this that I write about love and money. What else is there to write about? Though critics have ridiculed her novels are shop pieces in drawing rooms, we now know that her books contain much more than we have discussed so far. Thank you.